Order, roll call.
Trustee Benucci?
Here.
Trustee Fay?
Here.
Trustee Lamb?
Here.
Trustee Peck?
Here.
Trustee Rassich? Mayor Collins?
Here. Rise for the pledge.
We're seeking a motion to approve the minutes of the Committee of the Whole workshop and executive sessions held on April 13th.
So move. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Presidential comments?
I have none this evening.
Trustees' comments? No trustee comments. This would be the time for public comments. If there are no public comments, we'll proceed with the workshop meeting. First item on the agenda is Route 30 proposed TIF designation.
Yes, thank you. You have in your packet a memo from staff. As you know, we have been, over the past number of months, looking into an eligibility of a potential tax increment finance district for the Route 30 corridor. So what we wanted to do this evening is kind of walk you through specifically, we have a representative from SB Friedman, who's a consultant who's actually handling this or actually analyzing the potential eligibility of this corridor. You have in your packet a memo which very briefly just kind of outlines very briefly the history of tax increment finance districts in Illinois. As you know, we have an existing TIF in our downtown, which we used extensively over the past almost 18, 19 years. As you know, we've had an extensive facade program, and it's been a very successful endeavor. Based on that fact, we were instructed to look into an eligibility of a tax increment finance district. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to SB Friedman, and Fran will specifically walk you through the eligibility analysis, each step. If there's any questions, be more than happy, staff or SB Friedman will be more than happy to answer any questions that the village board may have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael. Is this on? Yeah. So nice to see you all again. I guess it's been a couple of months, and SB Friedman has made quite a bit of headway in our eligibility analysis for the Route 30 corridor. We have also been working with the Lakota Group and Retail Strategies and Sam Schwartz Engineering on starting the redevelopment strategy for the corridor. So provide first an update on where we are on eligibility for the TIF district and next steps for designation of the district if we choose to move forward with that. And then also I'll walk you through some of the initial redevelopment concepts that Lakota Group has worked with the village and with SB Friedman to develop for the priority sites. So first on the TIF designation, the good news for the eligibility findings is that we did find the majority of the study area to be eligible for designation as a TIF district. Can you go to the next slide? We started with a slightly larger area that included the whole corridor from Renwick Road south to the village boundaries. That's the Drum Farm property and also the Boulevard site. We did study eligibility for the entire corridor, and as I'll tell you about a little bit later, we're recommending a slightly smaller TIF district for moving forward with. It's a two-part designation. One part is for the improved area of the corridor, so that includes parcels that have existing building structures, but then also properties that have improvements such as stormwater facilities, parking lots, roadways through the parcel. The vacant is really vacant greenfield type of land. So for TIF eligibility, as I just mentioned, it's two-part designation. Looking at the improved area, there are two different ways to find an area eligible under the TIF statute. One is a conservation area, and the other is blighted. For a conservation area, at least 50% of the buildings have to be at least 35 years of age or older, and then 3 factors out of a possible 13 factors have to be found present. A conservation area does not mean that the area is blighted. It means that it's in danger of falling into blight in the future if the factors that are eligible are not dealt with. The blighted area designation is a little bit more extreme. That is a finding that the area is already blighted, and at least 5 factors out of those same 13 factors would have to be found. For vacant land, there are sort of different tests possible. One is a 1-factor approach, so those are things like chronic flooding on a site, previously used as a quarry, vacant rail yards, factors like that. There's also a two-factor approach which relies on different criteria. So for this TIF designation, we're looking at a combined conservation area for the improved area, and the two-factor test for vacant blighted. In order to assess the eligibility of the study area for TIF designation, we came out into the field with our field sheets. We looked parcel by parcel at the entire study area. So we're collecting factors about building layout, building condition. So we're looking for deterioration, dilapidation. We're looking at configuration on the site. Are there too many buildings on the existing site? What's the layout like? Does it meet contemporary standards? We're also looking at platting of the parcels. Do they meet current standards? What is the transportation access like? Just sort of taking a lot of different notes on all the different characteristics of the development and also the parcels. We also collect quite a bit of data on the historic use of the property. So we collect information from the village, from the township, from the county about EAV, about building age. We're looking at prior plans and studies that the village has conducted, but then also really digging into just the history of the parcel. So has there been investment in the parcel? What are the building permits? Village staff was great in providing all of this information to us and helping us sort of sift through any questions we had about the data. This just helps us go factor by factor through those 13 potential factors so that we can see for each parcel which criteria did we find for the parcel, and then overall, considering at the eligibility factor level, is that factor present to a meaningful extent in the study area and also reasonably distributed? So now I'll walk you through the factors that we did find in this area. The sort of red dashed boundary is the original area that we studied. The black boundary that has the shaded parcels within it is the recommended boundary that we're suggesting would be eligible if you choose to move forward. The dark parcels are the vacant parcels, and the lighter ones are currently improved. So for the improved land, the conservation area, we do have over 50% of buildings that are at least 35 years of age. The first factor we found was lack of growth and equalized assessed value. So that's, the proxy for property value. We found a lack of community planning, inadequate utilities, and the presence of structures below minimum code standards. Deterioration we found to sort of a minor extent, but we would not use that in the actual eligibility study because we didn't feel like it really rose to the level of being a factor for designation. For vacant land, we had obsolete platting of land and then also lack of growth in EAV. We can talk about this a little bit when we get to the vacant land, but I'm sure you're having questions in your mind about whether this land is currently vacant, but I'll cover that in just a second. So for building age, there are 24 primary structures in the corridor. 13 of those were constructed before 1980. You can see in the map that these are pretty much distributed through the area. I think it's a little hard to see in the map. I think the shading for a couple of these buildings, but it is 54% of the buildings that were constructed before 1980. The first factor, so that's sort of the baseline. In order to even consider the conservation area, you have to find the age, and then we move on to eligibility factors. So first is lack of growth in EAV. Under the statute, you have to find this for 3 of the past 5 periods, so year to year. We have a decline in EAV in 4 of the past 5 years. We also have growth less than CPI in 4 of the 5 past periods. Under the statute, any one of those criteria is acceptable, and in this case, we have 2. We are waiting for the 2014 final values, and so we'll update this analysis when those are available. I think at that point we'll have still at least 4 of the past 5 periods, and it might actually be 5 depending on what happens with EAV. I guess you can't see the slide fully, but this is inadequate utilities. We did find this to be a factor. So Under the statute, this is for underground or overhead utilities. The question is whether there are utilities of sufficient capacity in the area or whether they are lacking or antiquated or in disrepair. In this case, there's a lack of stormwater detention throughout the area. 24 of 29 of the improved parcels, or 83%, have inadequate utilities. So this will be true even after the Route 30 improvements. That will deal with stormwater for the roadway itself, but not for the buildings and improved parcels along the corridor. And again, this meets the test of being meaningful or being present to a meaningful extent and reasonably distributed. Lack of community planning is the third factor that we found for the improved parcels. This is a two-part test for this factor. The first part is whether the area was developed prior to or without the benefit of a comprehensive plan or a community plan, and that we found to be the case. Most of this area was developed prior to the village's first comprehensive plan in 1988 and prior to the area being annexed, which happened in 1989. The second part is a question of whether there's evidence of the lack of community planning. So do you see incompatible layout? Do you see improper subdivision or parcels of inadequate size and shape to meet the current development standards? And we found the answer to that question to be yes. You can see that the parcelization throughout the corridor does not meet current standards. We have narrow parcels. We have parcels that don't have proper access to right-of-way. We have a lot of curb cuts in the area. And buildings sort of overlapping parcel lines, which is not something that you sort of want to see in a contemporary district. So we found this factor to be present on an area-wide basis. The next factor is structures below minimum code. So for this factor, it's a question of whether the structures and actually the properties in the study area meet the standards of current government code. So that includes subdivision code, zoning, building code, fire code, and stormwater management. And as I talked about for the stormwater management under inadequate utilities, many of the parcels in this area don't meet stormwater requirements. With a few exceptions, I think the Durbin's building, the Crest Creek Plaza, and some major rehabs such as the Enterprise building. Most of the buildings in the corridor don't meet current building codes. So, they're legal non-conforming uses, but if anyone's going to think about redeveloping these properties, they're going to have to meet stormwater codes, building codes, and all of the other governmental codes that most of the parcels do not meet. So 26 of 29 improved parcels, or 90%, don't meet the current codes. So, yeah. The last factor is deterioration. So we did find this on 15 of 29 parcels in the area, so that's 52%. Under the code, deterioration can be on buildings, private improvements like parking lots, or public infrastructure. We did find some of each of these, so some minor building deterioration like missing gutters and downspouts, fascia falling off the side of the buildings, sort of minor deterioration of private improvement, so cracking of people's parking lots and a few potholes, but we didn't feel that this really wasn't quite present to the same extent as the other factors. So we would consider this minor, but not necessarily a major factor. So I think that's it for the improved land. For vacant land, vacant land can't have any permanent residential, commercial, or industrial buildings and can't have been used for commercial agriculture in the past 5 years. The past 5 years, there are a couple of exceptions to that. So one is whether the parcel had been divided into 3 or more parcels from a larger area between 1950 and 1990. Super technical, but if this was part of a bigger parcel historically, then it's considered to have been subdivided and could be eligible as vacant land. So that's something we're currently looking into. There are also on a couple of the much larger parcels, a couple of existing minor structures that would have to either be subdivided from the land or demolished. And we have been in touch through the village with the current property owners, and it sounds like those structures will be demolished in the near term. And so I think then we will have vacant land, and once we deal with the question of whether this was part of a larger area, then we'll know for sure that this will be eligible. So I guess these findings are subject to a little bit more work on the vacant land side of things. The next one. So the first factor was lack of growth in EAV. Similar as with improved land, we had EAV declining for 4 out of the 5 past periods. Growth less than CPI was actually for 5 out of the 5 past periods. And again, we'll update this once we have the 2014 values. Obsolete platting was the second factor. So this is again under the 2-factor vacant land test. So the test is whether the parcels are of limited or narrow size or have configurations that are irregular that would be difficult to develop on a planned basis, or platting that failed to create rights of way. So I think for the vacant land that you can see, we have the large boulevard site, which is actually made up of several different parcels. Across the street is the Drum Farm property. And then there's also a small vacant lot just sort of up along Renwick and Peerless. All of these vacant parcels we found to have obsolete platting. So some of them are too big, some of them are too small. Many don't have right of way or don't have access onto Route 30, and so have very limited development opportunities based on just the way that they were platted. So we found this for all of the parcels, and so it's present and reasonably distributed throughout the area. So under the TIF statute, there are several other required findings and tests that we have looked into. The first one is the lack of growth and private investment test. So one of the clearest factors that we look at to determine whether there has been a lack of investment is what is going on with EAV in the study area. And we did see that that has declined for both improved and vacant land, which shows a lack of growth and investment overall. There has been some limited reinvestment in the area in terms of folks sort of upgrading their properties, but a lot of this has been pretty minimal, and some of it's just ongoing maintenance. So, we haven't seen a lot of new construction happening in this area. One of the reasons that we are suggesting the slightly smaller study area is because of some larger investment in the parcels that were excluded. Second test is the but-for analysis. So the question is whether the area would be subject to development but for the TIF district. We believe that the study area does pass this test. Given the challenges of the many small parcels and the existing buildings, the age of the structures in the area, it's going to be challenging, I think, to find developers willing to come in and assemble properties, deal with potentially having to do stormwater remediation, bringing buildings up to code. All of those things are expensive, and given the option, many people would choose to spend their money in sort of easier situations. And so, that suggests that the area meets this but-for test. The need for public infrastructure improvements also can be challenging for developers, and so that's a second reason. Another test is that the TIF must conform to the plans of the village. Any TIF plan that we work with the village in creating would conform to the comprehensive plan and the 2008, I think, corridor enhancement plans. And we do have contiguity, and all parcels that are included would be expected to benefit from the TIF district. So I guess those are the requirements for designation under the TIF Act. We do think that the revised study area meets all of those standards. If the village wishes to proceed with the TIF designation, the next steps would be finalizing the vacant land issues. Village staff is working with property owners right now on annexation of the parcels. Both the parcels, the Boulevard site north of Route 30 and then also Drum Farm, are currently unincorporated. So those would need to be annexed. We may need to subdivide the parcels to the north if we can't find that they were already subdivided in prior decades. But village staff is working on that. So assuming those things are wrapped up in the month of May, we would work on developing the TIF plan in May and June, and then there's the whole public noticing and public approval process, which takes a couple of months. and that would happen during the summer months. So during that time, the village board has a couple more chances to consider the TIF designation. There's also a joint review board meeting, which includes representatives from the village and then all other taxing districts that are affected. I think we can keep going with the redevelopment strategy and then take questions at the end. So this is sort of the second part of the engagement. This is working with Lakota Group and Retail Strategies, who the village has separately engaged, to sort of start the thinking about the redevelopment strategy. We worked with Lakota, Sam Schwartz, and village staff to tour the area, think about the development here. We're sort of building on the information we collected during the TIF analysis. So we started looking at ownership, current tenancies, thinking about building conditions, and really looking for the sites that are most susceptible to change in the near term. So these are vacant sites, currently underutilized sites, sites where we know or think the ownership might be more likely to consider redevelopment. So you can't see it very well in the map, but we've identified 4 different sites. 4 of them are right along the corridor, and one is the larger boulevard site. The first 4 sites are redevelopment opportunities, so kind of smaller scale, and then of course there's the larger boulevard. So the first site is up at the corner of Renwick and Route 30. It's the former oil change and car wash site. So it's about 3.5 acres. It's actually 3 different parcels, and there are 3 different owners, so that's a little bit challenging, but we do think current owners may be willing to work together. I think one of the parcels is currently being marketed, but the other ones aren't. Talking to Retail Strategies, we had a couple of different ideas for this site that they think could be marketable. The first one we're showing here is roughly a 20,000 square foot grocery store. So this would be kind of the organic fresh market concept. So kind of a small grocery store focused mostly on produce with some other key grocery items. So we have just a grocery store, but also on-site stormwater management, sufficient parking, and sort of nice landscaping around the sides. The second concept for this site would be your more traditional retail center. So this is about 12,000 square feet of retail space, along with an 8,000 square foot full-service restaurant. The way we currently have these sited was to really try to hold the street wall and make it feel like you're entering a district when you come into Route 30. I think given some initial feedback that we've had from both the village and Retail Strategies, we're gonna do an alternate concept where we move the sort of long retail strip to the back of the site and have the parking out front, which is kind of a more traditional format. Doesn't really give you probably the same feeling at the entry, but might be better in terms of marketing for the retail tenants. So that's something that Lakota is going to be working on, I think, in the next step. The second site is the current Ford dealership. So this is 5 different parcels, actually, and all one owner. We started looking at this site because it is a big site right in the middle of the corridor, and given the potential for the Ford to relocate in the near term, we thought it was important to think about what uses could go here. And I think this site could really give an example of how to do good development in the corridor and show what the potential is for redevelopment if folks start thinking about assembling more sites in the longer term. So this first concept is a 30,000 square foot grocery. So this would be that same grocery store. There wouldn't be 2 in the corridor. It's one side or the other. And then 13,000 square feet of inline retail space along with that. So that's supporting kind of retail, service uses, smaller retail tenants, dry cleaners, hair salon sort of thing. Again, sufficient parking, and we also have cross access to the sites to the north and then also to the gas station to the south. Concept B is just a reconfiguration, so same grocery store, but this one is with a 10,000 square foot outlet. So this might be a bank, it might be a large restaurant, it might be, we're showing it with a drive-through, but it could also be a slightly different configuration without a drive-through. Third concept for this site, this is a slightly smaller version of the grocery store, so about 20,000 square feet. Again, inline retail, but this one has 2 outlets. I guess one thing I should have mentioned for the other 2, especially for concept A, no, I'm sorry. I guess concept B. Concept B really sort of held the same line that's happening with development to the north and also the Shell station to the south. So you see that sort of clean access road that comes along the front. So that would really help with access, getting people off of Route 30 when they're moving between the different retail corridors. I think going to concept C, we have the same thing happening. We have 2 outlets in this situation. I think we got a little bit of feedback from Sam Schwartz Engineering after we created this concept, and just making sure we have enough room, I think, around both of those drive-through areas. But, you know, we're working to refine these concepts, and I think they're in pretty good shape in terms of making sure that everything sort of works and makes sense. Moving to Site 3, this is the former Route 30-plex. It's a pretty big site at 7 acres, but most of the back of the site is not developable because it's wet. So just working with Lakota, we've estimated somewhere around 2.5 acres is developable, and I think village staff also looked at that and thought that sort of made sense. So we don't have a lot of space to work with, especially once you start thinking about parking and access and service for any new building. This first concept, we're showing about 7,500 square foot standalone restaurant. So could be a really nice restaurant site. You have space for an outdoor patio. You're overlooking the water feature. So we have a standalone restaurant, and then the next concept is two slightly smaller restaurants, both taking advantage of the sort of nicer space in the back. We did really think up front, we were thinking about different uses. I think when we started the study, we were really only charged with looking at retail uses along the corridor, but we started to think about the potential reuse as multifamily residential redevelopment. So, you know, we're thinking about doing some concepts that would show potential apartment buildings here if the village chooses to move forward with that. But, you know, we think there's a little bit more ability, since you can move apartments a little bit off of the road. You don't have to have the access. You don't have to have quite the visibility. So you could create sort of a nice space here. But in thinking about retail use alone, it's kind of a challenging redevelopment site. The fourth site is the Drum Farm property. So this is about 4 acres total. It's currently vacant. There are 2 different owners. Part of it's bank owned. So there's a little bit of an ownership situation to deal with, but we looked at 2 different concepts here. The first one is retail, purely retail. So it's 2 different buildings. One kind of extends from Crest Creek Plaza to the kind of northwest, and then there's a smaller building out front, which could be either standalone full-service restaurant, could be a couple of you know, more fast casual type restaurants, or just retail uses that really leverage potential traffic from the boulevard across the street. Access to the site is kind of challenging. You have right in, right out access right along Spangler Road. So we think it might be kind of challenging from a retail perspective, but Retail Strategies really thinks that, you know, if the boulevard moves forward as it was proposed, that's going to create enough traffic and enough gravity that folks will deal with a little bit of access issues to come to this site. And there are also tenants who would like to be near a major center like the boulevard, but can't afford the rents to be in, you know, right inside the site, that could pay for slightly lower end space, or just slightly cheaper space right across the street. So this site, or this concept, also takes advantage of some proposed IDOT stormwater detention out front, so really trying to make that into a feature instead of just having a pond. So trying to really start to change just how the corridor looks and feels. The second concept is more focused on professional office space. So this could actually be office or retail tenants. This is 2 12,000 square foot buildings. In both of these cases, we're actually showing shared access with Crest Creek Plaza. You know, you still have some of the same access issues, but we do think, you know, there are probably professional office tenants that would want to be in this situation, and they're not as reliant on having the good access. And then if there are retail tenants who want to be in this location, you know, it's certainly an appropriate style of building and layout to have retail space too. I think that's sort of the end of the concepts. We have already had conversations with Brian and Michael about the concepts and got some good feedback from them that we'll be integrating. Definitely willing and, you know, curious to hear what Village Board has to say about these concepts and sort of what you're thinking, sort of in terms of changes that you'd like to see going forward, or just feedback about what maybe we haven't thought about. We actually have a call with Retail Strategies tomorrow to dig into them in a little bit more detail than what we've heard so far. And, you know, once we refine the concepts, they'll be going with the mayor and with Brian to ICSC in May, and with Retail Strategies to market the site. So whatever concepts we have will be used to start talking to potential tenants about possibilities in the corridor. Going forward, you know, we didn't show you a concept for Site 5, which is the big boulevard site. We did have a conversation with the property owners, and they're still sort of moving forward with the assumption that the southern part of the site will be something like the boulevard that was planned. On the northern end of the site, we were thinking about, you know, the potential for residential or even maybe industrial, but either one of those scenarios would take additional analysis that we're not currently engaged to move forward with. I guess once we have our concepts and we've moved a little bit further along with the TIF analysis, we'll really start to think about what the overall redevelopment strategy for the corridor should be. We'll work with the staff on that and prepare a redevelopment strategy document that can be incorporated in and referenced in the TIF plan. So the goal is that the TIF plan is not a standalone document with overly sort of general objectives, but is really tied to the potential in the corridor and has real goals that sort of stem from what the situation is in the corridor. And the idea is they'll link together so that you have a real plan for what to do with the TIF district going forward. I think with that, we can do question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fran, for that presentation. You did a great job talking through all the different details and the like, but I'm sure there probably are some questions from the board. So with that, we'll just, likewise, if there's any feedback on the concepts that you might have to share.
A couple comments, I guess. Well, I like the idea of the site plans. They look like they'd be attractive destinations. It's part of the planning that, you know, 35 years ago, we weren't doing the kind of planning we're doing now. And this can make them very attractive places to go. Whether grocery stores go or not, it remains to be seen what people want to put in there. But the idea of upgrading them and showing them it can be better is I think, very effective. The other thing I'm interested in is the who sets the rules for TIFs. It looks to me, from what you've described here, the village board can decide to go ahead, but obviously there's some guidelines that we have to adhere to, and who sets those and who watches over what we do?
So the state of Illinois is in charge of regulating TIF districts. They created the act that allows for the creation, and they outline all of the eligibility criteria and the rules about both creating a TIF district but then also managing it over the 23-year life or the potentially longer life if it's extended.
So we prove it, and then we submit it to the state for them to bless what we've done. Is that?
Correct. So a consultant
Okay.
usually prepares the designation.
Just want to make
It's
sure.
reviewed
It looked
by,
like somebody's looking over our
it's
shoulder. I
reviewed by
wasn't sure who.
council, but then submitted to the state.
There you go.
Yeah, when we created the previous TIF, this is exactly what we did. Is we had a study done by a consulting group that acknowledged that we met the tests. That then gets used by Jim Harvey and very smart legal groups to put this document together. And actually, we've asked Jim to, if the board wants us to proceed, that is, of course, we've already asked Jim to take on that leadership position to put together the TIF documents themselves.
And the one thing, you know, Fran's gone through is these criteria are set by state statute. I mean, she's gone through the analysis similar to, you know, our own ordinance when we have findings of fact as to a special use or a rezoning. These criteria are set for all TIFs in the entire state of Illinois, but you need, you know, someone to go through, just like your planning staff goes through when you have a special use and says, these are the findings that have to be made. She's gone through the analysis that has to be made as to the eligibility, and that's all set out in state statute. And those standards, you know, you need somebody to go through parcel by parcel to see if those criteria are present or not.
Have a third party do it gives us kind of instant credibility. Can we get it done in time for ISC and whatever it is?
Well, the TIF designation and the TIF creation won't happen by the time we go to ICSC. That's actually, we're looking at, if the board wants us to continue with this process, it will take us through the summer, more than likely August, maybe into September, depending on how the timelines work out. But that's fine. What we're taking to ICSC are the concept plans and actually looking forward to not only presenting the ideas that were presented to you, there are a few others that we've been talking about, but as well then getting feedback actually from the retailers and from different interested parties on what does work and what doesn't work, to which then we'll be able to present that back. We're basically also getting free insights from the private sector that we can then put back into our own documents to help encourage further redevelopment in that area. So it's actually, the timing works out quite well, you know, remarkably well for us.
I think it's a very good plan for an area that's needed attention for quite a while from different groups. And I'll be happy to share this with anybody who wants to look at it. I pulled up a couple of documents and did a little research on it. It explains it quite well. You know, a couple of things on the internet explains exactly what you're asking about. There's a couple of them. There's one from Peoria and this other one's from a law firm that does explain the criteria of the TIF and how the rules work. My other question is, how does the bill that's floating around the state right now affecting TIFs going to affect us at this point?
That was our dinner conversation. Fran and I met before this just to talk through a couple of different details. And yeah, that is a big game changer. If indeed that does go through, it has the potential to be a big game changer. Essentially, you have to have other jurisdictions that actually don't have any role within your municipal jurisdiction to have a say on what happens within your municipal jurisdiction. So it's an interesting challenge. Thankfully, we've heard from a couple of different sources that it likely won't proceed at this point. However, it's Springfield, so there's no promises to that. But we both are optimistic that it won't make it out of this session.
I don't need people making it more difficult for us to function. I mean, good grief.
Well, somebody will.
You know, SB
We'll
Friedman
try,
also
yeah.
has,
Competition will.
sorry, excuse me. Put
Thank you.
together, we have some materials on our website that sort of provide an overview of TIF that I would be happy to share with you, or if you need any additional sort of documentation of what the eligibility criteria are that we use, I can certainly provide that for your review too. And if we got to the point where we're putting together an actual TIF plan, it's really outlined in a lot of detail what the specific factors are and what tests have to be met, and there's a lot of analysis and narrative backing those up.
One additional question, if I may. The appraised value, residential is appraised every 4 years. Are these commercial properties appraised every year? Or
So-
are we just looking at over a 4-year period, they're falling at different rates or something like that? These are done by the local appraisers as well.
This is the
Springfield Township appraiser.
equalized assessed value, which is done by the assessor, the local assessor. I believe they don't do a full reassessment every year where they go and put an actual value on each property, but they do accept appeals from property owners, and oftentimes in commercial districts, property owners appeal every year, and so in doing that, they have to submit all sorts of information about their actual income and expenses. So usually for commercial property, there are 3 different ways that you can value property. One is based on sales, one is based on income, one is based on construction value of the property. Almost always for commercial property. It is based on income, and so I think if you see declines in value, that tends to indicate declines in income or increases in expenses as provided by property owners, and would tend to probably be an accurate representation of values and changes in value in the area.
What you're saying is the property owners do provide income data every year? I know the sales tax is covered, but I'm a little bit amazed that they volunteer their sales revenue. Is this public information, or is this?
I don't think that they provide detail in terms of what, I guess they have to provide revenue and expenses so that the assessor can see what their net operating income is. I would assume that that is not probably public information. I'm not entirely sure exactly.
And what she's referring to too is that, you know, commercial owners appeal their assessments a lot more than, you know, the average homeowner. So if you want to do that, you just can't say, well, I think you're wrong. You have to come up with your own appraisal and analysis. So then, you know, that information becomes part of the assessor's file, so to speak, which it wouldn't if they didn't appeal. But the reality is they're much more active, as you pointed out, in that whole process, because you're dealing with a lot, usually, you know, much higher EAVs and numbers. So,
I was just curious about the.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
I know
that's
about the
publicly.
residential, commercial one, and not so familiar. So.
Yeah, usually residential owners don't appeal quite as often because values don't change as much, or they don't fluctuate from year to year based on sales numbers or revenue.
Thank you.
I don't have a question. I have a particular comment to make, not only to the board, but just to the general public. Oftentimes, someone would say, why are we even proposing a Route 30 tax increment financial district? I always feel, and it's really relatively important, to think that planning is essential for good growth. In order to have positive growth in this community, we have to plan. And we have to, as one of our trustees, Paul Fay, said all the time, to be proactive, not reactive. We can't wait until something possibly happens. Currently, the economic developmental community is relatively static, but that will not remain that way forever, I suspect. And we have to be ready for when the development comes, and this is a good footstep in the right direction. I always say the attention to detail is the religion of success. If you attend to detail, you'll be successful. Unfortunately, I think Napoleon said that before the Battle of Waterloo, but no, not really. But you attend to detail, you'll be successful. And I feel very, very confident that we are attending to detail here, hoping that we will be very successful in the future. And thank you for your good work.
Are there any other thoughts or comments? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Based on the feedback that we have, I think we can agree that we'll move forward with next steps with this. And with that, then next steps, Mr. Garrigan and the folks from SB Friedman and Mr. Harvey will be providing you with a lot more detailed information in the coming months. Thank you.
Reminders?
May the 4th be our next board meeting. May the 5th is the planning commission. And May the 11th be our next committee of the whole.
Motion's been made and seconded. Adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries.